Hello and welcome to this special broadcast. We are tracking the Indian Prime Minister's visit to Israel, and let's take you straight to the latest images that are coming in. He's at the Yad Vashem. He's been touring various places accompanied by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This is Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center, and it's customary for heads of state who visit Israel to pay their respects, to visit this center set up in the memory of those who lost their lives in the Holocaust. The Israelis believe that this nation came out of the ashes of the Holocaust, and it's important to remember their origin. This is an institute that was established in 1993 for Holocaust research. And it's active in the development and coordination of international research on the subject. There's also a museum. Narendra Modi getting a private tour by the Israeli Prime Minister, no less, who has on repeated occasions called him his dear friend. These are two countries bound together by history. They came into existence in their current form within 8 months of each other. 1948 was when the State of Israel was established. On 17th September 1950, then India under Prime Minister Nehru recognized the State of Israel, but full diplomatic relationship was established only in 1992 under the P.V. Narasimha Rao government, and now Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has taken it a step further, and a historic step it's being called, the first Indian Prime Minister to be visiting this country, and he's delinking Israel and Palestine, not visiting Ramallah on this trip. That's a very significant statement to make. He landed earlier today, about 2.5 hours back, and was given a warm reception, a red carpet welcome by Prime Minister Netanyahu and his team. And we have a special panel joining us to discuss the various facets of this relationship. Alvait Singh, he's a senior research associate, someone who has studied in Israel and studied India-Israel relationship in detail. We have Dr. Martin Sherman from Israel, from Tel Aviv, I understand. He's a defense expert. Lieutenant General, retired Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, former GOC, someone who understands strategy and defense very well. Good evening to all of you. Dr. Sherman, if I could come to you first, take us through the significance of this visit.
I think this is a real landmark event. I think it's an extremely significant event for both countries, and I think it marks the end of one era and the beginning of a new era. You know, up until the 1990s, there was a very chilly relationship towards Israel, which gradually warmed up, but there was still some reticence in it. And I think Mr. Modi's visit today has ripped away the reticence that they had, and especially with the decoupling that you mentioned, the decoupling of the Palestinian issue. I think he showed commendable courage in defying the normal dictates of political correctness, and has not found it necessary to visit the Palestinian representatives in order to somehow justify his visit in Israel. If I just may add, on a personal note, for me it's quite gratifying because, to the best of my knowledge, I was the first Israeli, if at least one of the first Israelis, together with a prominent Indian researcher, Professor Emil Sondi, who wrote about the importance, the strategic importance for India and for Israel. So I'm extremely pleased that this has come to fruition.
Absolutely. Albeit this particular memorial and this institute that the Prime Minister is visiting is a place that we understand most heads of state and senior dignitaries who come to Israel visit. For the audience in India, just explain why this is so important.
I take it you're talking about Yad Vashem.
Yes. Okay. Dr. Sherman, yes. Go ahead.
Sorry, I thought you asked me. Yad Vashem is a very important memorial in Israeli and Jewish history because it commemorates the Holocaust and the murder of 6 million Jews during the Second World War. And in many ways, this is one of the most searing episodes in Jewish history, and indeed, nearly all visiting dignitaries visited, including President Trump on his last visit. So I think this is just together with that just conforms with the usual protocol.
Right. I'll write the same question to you. Why is this so significant? And just describe to us, if you're looking at these images, what is going on and what is this institute all about?
Right. It has been very symbolic for the Prime Minister to visit this place, given it is a kind of a reflection of how the Israel has established itself from the ashes. You know, it is also a symbolism of the sufferings of the Jews in during the Holocaust period. So paying a visit to this place itself speaks about the kind of attachment that we are showing to the country and the people, and how this kind of a perseverance and persistence can lead up to a nation like Israel, which has marked its name all over the world in terms of anything you said: technology, defense, water, irrigation, and everything, you name it.
Right. We also have Professor Harsh Pant. He is a distinguished fellow of the ORF with me in the studio. Professor Pant, do you want to weigh in on the images that we're looking at?
Yes, I think it's remarkable for an Indian Prime Minister to be doing this after so many years of establishing diplomatic relations, and I think that in many ways underscores the point that was made by Martin Sherman earlier, that perhaps this marks the beginning of a new phase in India's Middle East policy, which has been undergoing significant changes over the years. But I think this outreach to Israel is one of the most significant ones we have seen in Indo-Israeli history, and I think this will mark a new phase in the relationship. As India and Israeli societies have always been very close to each other, it's the government that has now started taking the initiative, and I think the government has now gotten in sync with the larger reality that the two nations actually have a realignment of interests that perhaps needs to be furthered and that needs to be acknowledged.
So, Dr. Sherman, essentially the Indian Prime Minister has been given a guided tour to the origin, the history of Israel, for him to better understand the cultural context?
I'm not quite sure what his itinerary is, but I'm sure they will do that. And I'm sure that Mr. Modi himself is well aware of much of the history of Israel. He's always been a strong supporter of the Jewish state. And I have no doubt that he will be immersed into the history through various visits in the country. There's just so much scope for cooperation between these two countries, which I've always characterized as a bond between the world's biggest democracy, India, and the world's most beleaguered democracy, Israel. And I think that, you know, as opposed to many other relationships that Israel has with countries in this region, the real strategic glue between the two countries is their commitment to democratic governance. Because, you know, people are talking now about strategic bonds with Egypt and with Saudi Arabia, but there's no real convergence of interests in the deepest sense. There's a perception of a common threat, but I think with India, we really perceive our national interests in very similar ways. And I think there's room for a far deeper and trust-based relationship between New Delhi and Jerusalem than almost any other country except the United States. Indeed, a number of years ago, it was who now serving as the then finance minister and today the energy minister, Yuval Steinitz, has said our relationship with India is second only to the US. I believe that this is very true, and I think that Israel has deep strategic interests in its relationship with India, and I believe that's mutual. I believe it's really a mutual relationship that both countries will benefit greatly, tremendously, from the bond between them.
And the Indian Prime Minister made the first moves to cement these ties very early on after taking office, within weeks. In fact, when he visited the United Nations General Assembly in New York, he met Prime Minister Netanyahu on the sidelines of the summit, and that was seen as a first move. Is it surprising for the Israeli dispensation that it's taken him 3 years to visit? We've seen a lot of high-profile visits over the past few years.
Well, I'm not sure, but one thing is for sure: better late than never. So, you know, I wouldn't look on the downside. I think Prime Minister Modi has been very supportive in Israel, both in his demeanor and in his declarations. So I think we should be appreciative of the fact that he has come now. It's not always an easy thing for an Indian Prime Minister to do something like that, and I must commend him on his courage.
Absolutely. General Hasnain is with us. Good evening, General. We've been looking at images. First, the reception, the warm hugs, the handshakes, and now these solemn images from the Yad Vashem. What is your first impression of how this visit has begun?
Well, I think the ceremonies at the Ben Gurion airport and the optics which were available from there give out the whole picture. They just show that the next 3 days are going to be packed with very, very eventful things, and this is actually history in the making. I actually gave out a tweet to tell people to watch this because this is actually history in the making. Primarily, the way I look at it is that for the first time, despite 25 years ago establishing our relationship, our diplomatic relationship, somehow there was always a tentativeness in our relationship. There was always a shadow of the relationship with the Arab world, with the Islamic world, and particularly with Palestine. We were always considered as great friends of Palestine, which we are even today. But finally, 3 years after he's come to power, Prime Minister Modi has been able to shake off that shadow and actually take this relationship from a transactional one to a transformative one. I think that is the way I'm looking at the final achievements of this relationship, of this visit also. Lots of people are saying that he should have also visited Ramallah. I think 25 kilometers is the distance to Ramallah, is a huge distance as far as relationships are concerned. It does not dilute the importance of Palestine in any way, but it only enhances the importance of Israel and the strategic relationship which is emerging, which is going to be indeed a transformative one.
Well, India did try to balance it a bit by hosting the Palestinian president a couple of months back. But nonetheless, this is very, very significant, the fact that he's not going to Ramallah, and that's something that the press, more so in Israel, has been talking about a lot.
Yes, I think for Israel, this is a very big deal that we are not hyphenating India's relationship with Israel with Palestine. And I think for a nation that has stood by India in its times of serious trouble, not acknowledging the fact that Israel is such an important partner has been a bit of an issue. And I think this is now being remedied. And I think we are underestimating when we say that Mr. Modi has taken 3 years to go there, the challenges that an Indian Prime Minister faces when it comes to Israel. And I think what he has done is very carefully mapped out a Middle East policy, where he has first engaged countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, Qatar, and then now he decides to go to
and it
Israel.
helps that Saudi Arabia and others are also now looking at doing business with Israel.
So I think that the larger balance of power in the region has to be taken into consideration, and he did very well in terms of balancing those considerations and perhaps making some of the critique that still is emerging, but somehow balancing that criticism that potentially he would have got, that look, you are now reaching out to Israel in the very first year, or in the very first months, whereas your traditional allies, which are the Arab Gulf states or even Iran, are not on your radar. So I think that he has done very well. He has now reached out at a time and a pace of his choosing to Israel, and I think that's a very fundamental transformation that is happening in terms of Indo-Israeli relationship and India's place in the Middle East as well.
And I think he also waited for Barack Obama to demit office. That equation also came into the picture. But those of our viewers who missed this, let's take a look at how the visit began. They hugged each other thrice, shook hands with what has been called childlike enthusiasm. The warmth of their relationship was visible on their lips. We're talking about Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Israeli counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu. The two leaders have met twice on previous occasions, but today is another day. Today, Israel's long wait came to an end as Prime Minister Narendra Modi's plane touched down in Tel Aviv. The two Prime Ministers later visited the Danziger flower farm, and the smell of the Indo-Israel friendship, the new phase of this friendship, is certainly in the air. Listen into what they said. In fact, before we go to those reactions that came in, both the Prime Ministers, of course, addressed the gathering right after Prime Minister Narendra Modi touched down. Let's tell you a little more about the man that the Indian Prime Minister has been calling his good friend. That's how both the leaders have been addressing each other, both on Twitter and otherwise. Let's bring you a profile of Benjamin Netanyahu. Of Benjamin Netanyahu when he was an elite Israeli Special Forces commando. It was a unit called the Sayeret Maktel. This was 50 years ago. As a commando in this unit, he saw action in Beirut in 1968 and during the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. This is the Israeli Prime Minister many, many years back. He lost his brother during the Israeli commando raid in Uganda in 1976, something that he remembers even today. In an interview last year, he said, and I'm quoting, "Often I have to dispatch people to places where if there's a failure, they won't come back. It's in times like these that I consult with my brother, and they're a lot more frequent than you might think." He's Israel's 10th Prime Minister, in which capacity he's playing host to Narendra Modi. Netanyahu is described as a shrewd political operator. His concern has always been Israel's security. He set up an anti-terrorism center in his brother's memory. He's very concerned about the rise of militant Islam. He's articulate and intelligent, seen as an effective advocate of Israel's cause. His concern about his country's security is reflected in his politics and his policies. He is a right-of-center politician. He has taken a tough line on Palestinian rights. He sees any exchange of land for peace with the Palestinians as too dangerous to accept. He sees Iran as an enemy committed to the destruction of Israel, and even criticized former US President Obama's nuclear deal with that country. He has said that he will use force to stop Iran's nuclear program if all else fails. So this is Benjamin Netanyahu. Dr. Sherman, I want to come back to you. We are looking at chemistry, we are talking about chemistry. How significant is that when two heads of state meet, when two nations deal with each other? How much of it comes about it?
I think it is important. We saw the exact reverse picture between Netanyahu and Obama, where there was a very cold relationship between them and very, very bad chemistry. I think that what we're seeing now is exactly the opposite. We have two people who are very well compatible, who like each other, have in large measure similar worldviews. So I think this is a positive ingredient which will probably propel the relationship further during the rest of the incumbency of these two leaders. And I really think that the cooperation between India and Israel, I really think in this partnership, the sky's the limit. And I think we're probably going to see an acceleration of joint achievements with the two countries.
How much does it help Netanyahu politically, the fact that the leader of the world's biggest democracy is coming to Israel when he's the head of state?
I think tremendously. In particular, I think the fact that he has been at the receiving end of a large number of traditional partners of Israel, especially the Western Europeans. And there is a sense that Israel, under Netanyahu, is getting isolated. And I think this will be a big boost for him, that a country like India now is openly acknowledging the relationship. So I think it's a tremendous achievement for him. And I think that's why the personal equation that you were talking about between Modi and Netanyahu matters so much. Because I think in the broader context of geopolitics, it matters if two important democracies in a part of the world which is very turbulent can get along with each other and show almost a show of support for each other's concerns.
You mentioned geopolitics. General Hasnain, a few months back, Netanyahu was in Beijing and he talked about the quote-unquote marriage of Israel and China. And he's calling the relationship with India historic, unprecedented, my good friend. How do they balance the two?
That indeed is going to be a challenge. But just remember that Israel's relationship with China is emerging. With India, somehow this relationship is older. We should not forget that from 1948 onwards, while we may not have had diplomatic relations, there was some kind of an understanding. We had a consulate even in Mumbai at that time, and we had a kind of a fledgling people-to-people relationship. From 1992, of course, that all changed. Today, of course, Israel is free, is a democratic country, is free to pursue its national interests, and its national interests actually involve good relations with China, good relations with India. It has to balance it out. It is fully aware that there is a problem going on the Sino-Indian border at the moment. But triangular relationships of this kind have been seen all over the world. It is not necessary that your friend's friend is your friend, or your enemy's enemy is your friend. It need not be seen in those terms. They can actually continue maintaining an equitable relationship between China and India. And it's not that as if India and China are sworn enemies. There are lots and lots of points of convergence between all three nations. Trade, technology, all these issues are ultimately for the people of the three countries. So I don't think there is such a major challenge in this. Israel is absolutely free to pursue its own policies.
Alvite, would you say that this is a maturing of Indian foreign policy from mere ideology to a bit of pragmatism too?
I would absolutely say that.
Yeah, it is indeed an evolution of the...
Yes, go ahead, Alvite.
Can I come in?
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what General Hasnain has said. It is indeed the maturation of the policy. We are no longer bound by the traditional and the ideological based policy which we have been doing, especially in the Middle East. And there are lots to gain by coming out of this closet. There are much more to be, getting from the Israelis. And I'm sure the Israelis will get similarly from the Indian side as well by coming out in the public that we are no longer bound by the traditional approach. And if I can say something about the Chinese part.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Yeah, if I can say something about the Chinese part, yeah. The manner in which China established diplomatic relations with China was also very fascinating. There was lots of arms diplomacy which was going on from the late 70s onwards, and they reached a comfort level by the 80s and early 90s. But the only difference is, like, while China's military relations with Israel scaled down from the mid 90s onwards, that of India's went up from the late 90s onwards. So there's also a fine line of difference how in China was dealing, and there are so many other external factors to that, which we don't have to go into details right now. But at the same time, China is the largest economic partner for Israel, and they have lots of economic stakes, and people-to-people contact are still going on very strong. But at the same time, economic relations are on the rise, but defense cooperation has set a benchmark, and it's very comfortable at the moment. We might get to see more of that cooperation in the days to come.
That was going to be my next question to Dr. Sherman. We've heard about defense ties, we've heard about deals that will be signed and talked about. What is on the table? What have you heard?
Well, I think everybody knows that the defense relations are becoming closer and closer and more profound. I think perhaps one of the most interesting spheres to keep our eye on is the naval sphere and the Indian Ocean, because this is a critical area for both countries, and it's becoming more and more important for Israel. People once scoffed at the need for Israel to have a blue water navy, but now Israel's submarine arm is becoming more and more strategic, especially given the threat from Iran. And so the Indian Ocean theater is becoming crucially important for Israel as well. But I think that just about in every field that you can think of, there's room for cooperation. Israel supplied high-tech equipment to India on various fronts. I think intelligence sharing and counterterrorism are extremely important, because there's a similarity, if not an identity, between the kind of foes that Israel's forced to face and those that might be ranged against India. We both have the problem with terrorism, especially radical Islamist terror. So I think that basically there's a wide scope for cooperation virtually on every single front. But as I said, I think the very interesting areas to watch is the naval area and security in the Indian Ocean.
Right, I'll come to terrorism in a bit, but I want to ask you, Professor Pant, in terms of defense deals, what specifically are we looking at, and why is it that there's such a gap? The two countries are more or less the same age. Israel has made long strides. India is still looking at a long way to go.
I think primarily it's the defense industrial base that has in India has been lagging, and Israel has really been able to seamlessly manage its industry, its private sector, and its defense industrial base to come up with a defense strategy that has allowed it to emerge as a cutting-edge defense supplier. And I think one of the things that it relies on is primarily this idea that that Israel has this cutting-edge defense technology that it can give to countries that need it. And I think that's where the equation with China becomes very interesting, because both India and China have initially engaged Israel partly because of the defense requirements that both countries had. So I think one of the things that perhaps we will be learning more from Israel as part of this outreach and as part of Mr. Modi's Make in India initiative is how these collaborations, joint ventures develop between Israeli defense sector and Indian defense sector, and how we can build on these, use Israeli know-how to somehow develop our capacity, which still continues to lag, as you pointed out, very much behind not only Israel but also several other countries.
Right, and I want to come back to how much of what Israel does in counter-terrorism, etc., can be implemented here in India. But before that, I'm told we have Karthikeya Sharma, my colleague, who's standing by live in Tel Aviv. Let's go straight to him. Karthikeya, we've been looking at images coming in, the two leaders with each other at the flower farm, the Holocaust Memorial, and of course the grand reception that Narendra Modi received.
Yes. Oh, it was pretty grand, I would say. A lot of political observers, newspaper editors, the spokesperson of the foreign ministry, saying that this is unprecedented, not has happened. There's some courtesies which were only accorded to the President of the United States of America, but that they have been extended to Narendra Modi. But Palki, coming back from Tel Aviv, you know, I came back to the city of culture, the old place, Jerusalem, and with me is the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. My question to the editor-in-chief of Jerusalem Post, Mr. Johan Katz, would be, so how do you sum up this visit? In what perspective the meeting of Netanyahu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi has to be seen?
Well, I think it's historic, right? I think what you have here is really an amazing example of the close friendship that Israel has with India and the close ties that we have that are not just, you know, people tend to focus on the defense, they tend to focus on agriculture, on water, but this is really what we're seeing today, and I think what we'll see tomorrow and the next day over the 3 days that Prime Minister Modi is here in Israel is really a close alliance, a close friendship between the state of India and the state of Israel, two countries that came to independence just around the same time, your country in 1947, my country in 1948, and really built up some of the greatest democracies in the world today. I mean, you are the biggest democracy, but we're a little smaller, right? Only 8 million people compared to your 1.3 billion, but still we have a lot of shared values, a lot of shared principles, and I think what we're seeing today with that hug that Prime Minister Modi gave to Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Why is press in Israel giving so much of importance to the ceremony which we saw? Because, you know, I spoke to your team, I went through the newspapers, I saw it myself, gone down when I was having food, a lot of people were talking about it. I mean, to say this is common in India. A hug is a gesture.
I'll tell you why, right? I think there's an easy explanation, at least what I think. Israel, you have to understand the state of Israel and the psyche, the mentality within Israel. Israel is a country that since independence in 1948, since inception, has been threatened, has faced war every few years. The war of 48, 56, 67, 73, First Lebanon War, Second Lebanon War, Gaza operations. There are terrorists that surround us, rockets being fired into our cities, Palestinian terrorists who want to stab Israelis as they walk down the streets, Hezbollah amassing a massive arsenal of rockets and missiles in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza. We're very much isolated within our region. When you have the leader of a country who comes to Israel and hugs our leader, I think every Israeli feels that hug, feels that love, feels that warmth. And that's something that we don't take for granted here in Israel. That's something that we appreciate. Israelis genuinely appreciate this sign and symbol of friendship that we're getting today from the Indian people through Prime Minister Modi. That's something that I don't think you can fully understand and appreciate unless you're Israeli.
But tell me one thing, you know, people say that relationship between countries has to be independent of political actors.
Correct.
Because once they become strategic, it becomes independent of them. It becomes long-lasting. It becomes a discourse between two nations. Do you see there's a potential between India and Israel to have that joint future apart from tackling terrorism together?
I hope that that's the case. Look, we have ties with the United States, which is probably our strongest ally in the world. That is bipartisan. Makes no difference if there's a Republican president in the White House or a Democratic president in the White House. I think what we've seen over the last 25 years is a steady increase in ties between our two countries that in the beginning were primarily based on defense and army and military and terrorism, but have now increased to way beyond that. Modi's visit here is a demonstration of how we're now taking those ties to the next level. And I think that it will continue. I think that we have what to gain from being friends with you. I think you have what to gain from being friends with us. And I think that the sharing of experiences, of values, of technology, of military cooperation, of trade, which is today only at about $5 billion. But if Israel and India sign a free trade agreement, all expectations of that will go through the roof. So there's a lot more that can be done.
You know, there are a couple of things happening. Like, for example, there's like a symbolic mapping of Israel which is taking place. You know, he's going to Haifa, he's going to the water desalination plant, he goes to the Volcani Center. But I also heard a lot of people saying, good he didn't went to Ramallah. You know, please explain it to me why this conversation comes up. Does it really make a difference to the Israelis that the Modi stays put in Jerusalem, does his business, speaks to everyone, go there and not go to the Palestinian-controlled territories?
Look, there's definitely a message that's being sent by the fact that the Prime Minister of India is not visiting the Palestinian territories, right? There's something being said there. Now, I don't know what his thinking is. I didn't ask him. I didn't have that opportunity. But the average Israeli will look at that and say, wow, this is a real friend. This is someone who's coming, and just coming to us. Not doing what the protocol says of all leaders who come here. You check off Jerusalem by Netanyahu, and then you check off Ramallah by Mahmoud Abbas.
You're saying Modi has taken a position when it comes to the politics of West Asia.
He's taken a side, and I think that for Israel, that is something that's not often seen. That's something that is appreciated. That's something that we look at very much and say, wow, this is someone who's saying and sending a message to his people and to the world, I stand with you.
On the lighter side, coming back to food, I think, the King David Hotel has, and your paper also reported, it has made a lot of changes in terms, a separate kitchen has been given, a tea cozy has been arranged for the Prime Minister Modi because a personal valet is coming and there was no tea cozy available. So, and for example, even the bar has been shifted out to the heritage side of the hotel, and the hotel room stays the same for 2 hours after Modi departs in case he needs to come back, And even a Indo-Israeli chef, Rima Pushkarna, has been hired to make special vegetarian dishes for him.
Look, we want our guests to feel at home, right? And that's something that we do.
And no poultry and no meat dishes at the luncheon. And I've heard that it's only fish.
It's only fish. That's what I've read also. I've heard that it's only fish or vegetarian, right? Israel is going all out. I think you see that beyond just the food for a moment. The Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu.
Food for thought.
Food for thought. That's very good. The Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, when a foreign leader comes here, besides for the President of America, so let's say the Prime Minister of Britain or Netherlands or Sweden came through Israel. He'd meet them once, maybe twice, maybe host them for a dinner. Here, the Prime Minister of Israel is going to be accompanying Prime Minister Modi, I think, on 13 different stops along this trip.
In 49 hours?
In the span of just, 2.5 days. That's pretty incredible. And I think that shows how important Netanyahu views this personally and how important Netanyahu views this on a national level, what it means for Israel.
Are you saying that this meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Netanyahu is a way to seal the deal between Israel and India so that it becomes independent of political actors in both countries and becomes oriented towards Tel Aviv, Jerusalem and New Delhi?
I think so, and I think that that's what's important. I think that, both leaders, they seem to have a unique friendship, that friendship seems to be playing out right now, and that's important for taking those ties to the next level, but both leaders won't be around forever, and what's more important is for the ties between the peoples to stay at a strong level. I think that there is a lot of understanding in India for Israel. There's a lot of respect for Israel and India. And in Israel, there's a lot of respect for the amazing country that you have in India.
But Katz, tell me, a lot of people are talking about defense. They are talking about, the civilian technologies. One aspect has not been taken care of. He's meeting a lot of businessmen day after tomorrow. Huge delegation. What is this about? What sort of business engagement are we looking into?
I mean, look, India is one of the biggest economies in the world today, right? Your growth is projected to be at, I read somewhere 7%,
yes.
6%.
Yes.
Our growth is about 4%, 3%, but we're a very innovative country. We have a lot of creative technology, whether it's cyber technology, life sciences, agriculture, water technology, and defense, right? That's just one aspect of it. So I think that we can offer India a lot of these different technologies to help with your recycling water, recycling sewage, for desalination, for protecting your banking systems, for whether it's drip irrigation for your crops, which is already being used, whether it's medical devices that Israel is known for and has become famous for, cardiovascular technology. There's a lot that we've created an expertise in that can also help you.
And lastly, before I let go of you, I made a promise to you for 5 minutes. He's also going to go to the family of Moshe.
Yeah.
I think he's going to spend 40 minutes there, or half an hour, sometime.
That's what I saw on the schedule, right?
He's a child, both connecting Israel and India. And he symbolizes a lot of things what is gone wrong in certain regions of the planet. How deeply do you read into this gesture on part of the Prime Minister, Modi to be there, and Netanyahu to accompany him?
I think it's moving. As I hear you speak about it, I'm moved. I think it's an emotional experience. Moshe is not the first child, unfortunately, in Israel to lose his parents in a terrorist
He's a child
attack.
of tragedy.
Right, he's a child of tragedy, and well put, and there's many children of tragedy in Israel, and I know also in India. And I think that that's something that bonds these two nations together and bonds these two leaders together. Netanyahu himself lost a brother in combat.
And I think Narendra Modi mentioned it in his tarmac speech, and I think Netanyahu was
very moved. I'm sure.
Moved.
And I think that what you see here is that those are ties those blood ties create those intimate ties between nations. We both face similar challenges with the radical Islamic terror that we face here, similar challenges that you face in India. And I think that those experiences is what also leads to this really increase in ties, increase in relations, taking the relationship after 25 years to the next level.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katz. So, the editor of Jerusalem Post, in a very moving way, has put it that, don't read this trip of Prime Minister Narendra Modi only in terms of pacts or security scenario. It's about acknowledging a tie, coming out in open, acknowledging a relationship, because it also marks 25 years of full diplomatic ties.
That's right.
With India. And if I read it right in terms of geostrategic position, Palki, it's also about two prime ministers who believe that there is no point giving concession to terrorists. There is no point giving concessions to those who want to create violence, and that's the policy Netanyahu also has implemented. That's what Modi is also doing. And self-reliance, and basis on self-reliance, interaction between two countries can be highly productive. That's my take for you, Palki, from Jerusalem.
Thanks very much, Karthikeyan and Ron. Thank you very much for putting a lot of those things in perspective. And those are the kind of reactions that we've been getting across the board in Israel. We're looking at this relationship and the road ahead. And before we take this discussion forward, let's quickly listen in to what the two prime ministers said right after Narendra Modi touched down in Tel Aviv.
A progressive partnership in all these areas would shape the scope of my conversation with Prime Minister, my friend Netanyahu. I'm also keen to interact with the Indian diaspora in Israel, including a large number of Jews of Indian origin who have enriched both our societies.
My friend Prime Minister Narendra Modi, welcome to Israel. आपका स्वागत है मेरे दोस्त. Prime Minister, we've been waiting for you a long time. We've been waiting almost 70 years, in fact, because yours is truly a historic visit. It's the first time an Indian Prime Minister is visiting Israel. We receive you with open arms. We love India.
Right, our guests continue to be with us. General Hussain, Karthikeyan, as he tossed back to us, talked about new geopolitics, and this perhaps is an indication of the new pivots from an Atlantic to an Indo-Pacific world order that we are talking about. It did not need a prime ministerial visit to augment the defense and cultural and business ties, but it's significant nonetheless. It's the beginning or the acknowledgement of a security relationship that's growing stronger.
There's no doubt about it. In fact, the entire existence of Israel is driven by its security consciousness. And increasingly in India also, we have for the last many years lived with security consciousness. So the two are really meeting. It's very important that the worldview that these two important nations have, one of 1.3 billion people and one of 9 million people, which is really punching much above its weight. The two of them must have matching ideas and bring their best practices together, bring their ideas and minds together. That's the message which is coming out from here. On the defense front in particular, my observation, and I've been to Israel, I've driven around almost all the cities of Israel. I can tell you something with the takeaway which for me would have been, particularly in the field of intervention operations in counterterrorism, particularly in the area of counter-infiltration, particularly looking at the manner in which Israel has constructed its wall all along and actually made that wall into virtually an electronic wall. We have tried very hard in our border management systems to try and make these into electronic walls, but we have not really succeeded. I hope that we can put our minds together and match our resources together to achieve this. And the last is cyber technology, which is the most emerging threat at the moment, cyber threats. We've seen in Kashmir what is happening through social media with the need of cyber warriors. This is something which we can really gain from Israel, because Israel has the finest, probably the finest cyber technologies to fight terrorism in many ways. So I'm looking at a range of areas to see this entire relationship in the defense sector developing.
Right. I understand that India can learn a lot and take a lot from Israel in terms of counterterrorism, defense, etc. But is some of it a bit overstated sometimes? A lot of what Israel does cannot be, for example, he mentioned the fences. It's a small country. We are a very big country with a huge border running into thousands of kilometers. How much of what Israel does can be implemented here? When we buy arms, that's another question. Do we have the will? Do we follow those policies? Do we have the legal framework to do what an Israeli force does?
See, Israeli counter-terror policy has evolved over a long period of time in a certain context. And I think our policies have also evolved in a certain context, and I think the two contexts are important, but they're different. There is a structural logic to when we say, we are circumscribed by our neighbors. Some of our neighbors are very problematic. It is the case with Israel, it is the case with India. But I think if you compare the topography, if you compare the challenges, for example, across the entire border area that India faces from its neighbors, there are problems in terms of just if you are comparing India and Israel, it can't be mapped. Israeli experience can't be mapped onto India one-on-one. But I think there are certain lessons that we can learn, exactly the point that you made about the broader frameworks. How does a liberal democratic society fight terrorism in a modern day and age? And I think India's legal framework, India's institutional framework remains far behind what Israel has been able to accomplish, partly because the threat perceptions have been very, very different. Now, as the debate in India grows about what, as I think the General was mentioning, a certain security consciousness, that the changing nature of terrorism that we are facing is markedly different, for example, from the one that we were facing a few decades back. So therefore, I think there is potential there in terms of commonalities that we can harness. But I think the basic point is that no country's experience can exactly match the other country's experience. And I think we have to evolve our own policies, but learn the best that Israel can offer.
Right. Of course, Israeli companies are also talking about making in India. Netanyahu said, your make in India is my make with India, and that is going to be the focus of this conversation going forward. Dr. Sherman, I want to ask you then, what are the concerns when Israeli defense manufacturers say that they're ready to come and make in India?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by concerns, but I certainly think that there's
concerns about sharing intellectual property and so on and so forth.
Oh, yes. Well, that's a natural concern. I think when it comes to India, the concerns are probably less than if we were talking about a country like China or Saudi Arabia or Egypt. As I said before, I think there's a greater convergence of values and interests, and the fact that we have if not identical adversaries, we have similar adversaries. So I think there is scope. I've suggested this many times in the past in joint collaboration. I know that Israel's used Indian technology for space uses, and I think there could be quite a lot of exciting opportunities ahead of us in joint construction of submarines, joint construction of naval vessels, production of aircraft parts. But I agree, people guard their intellectual properties, intellectual property quite jealously. And that's something that both countries will have to confront and earn each other's trust.
Right. Alvite, Israel, of course, is looking at the Indian defense market, but what's in it for Israel beyond that? What can the big takeaway be for Israel from India when it comes to defense and security cooperation?
Well, I think one of the big things is that it helps the Israeli industry spread its overheads. I saw some figures some time ago saying that Israel needs to export 75% of its security production in order to keep its qualitative edge. So the fact that it can find large additional markets is a great contribution to Israel, because it allows it to spread its overheads and keep its competitive edge in its existing industries. Because without large exports, it's very difficult for Israel to sustain its independent arms industry. So in many ways, the Indian market is a crucial element in allowing it to do that.
Absolutely. I'm going to thank you all, Professor Pant, Dr. Sherman, General Hasnain and Alvite Singh. Thank you very much for being with us on the show and for shedding light on the various aspects of this relationship. In the West, of course, many are looking at India's landmark visit, the Indian Prime Minister's visit rather, to Israel. With great interest, it is being held up as proof of India's modernization in terms of both economy and foreign policy. Take a look at this report.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit is seen as placing an official seal on an increasingly close relationship with Israel that is underpinned by billions of dollars in arms sales. Many commentators see the trip as proof of a maturing relationship between the countries, with India focusing on deepening defense, technological and commercial ties with the Jewish state, and not just seeing the country in terms of India's policy to the Palestinians. And India is a key part of Israel's movement away from its traditional European partners and towards the rising Asian economies. Pundits are also questioning whether the move will anger India's large Muslim population, as Israel is often painted as an anti-Muslim state.
Newspapers here in London have given a historic overview of relations between the two countries and see it as a move from India away from its old Cold War Soviet allies and towards the West. A move that is welcome here. Mandy Clark, WION, London.
And Mandy Clark is joining us live from London this evening. Good evening, Mandy. I want you to dwell a little more on the kind of reactions that are coming in and how the Western press in particular looks at this visit.
Overall, the reaction is positive. They think what's good for Israel ultimately will likely be good for them. Israel is very much seen as an ally in the West and has Western values. They like this pivot. Not just the visit, but overall Prime Minister Narendra Modi's style, how he is willing to go out into the world. He's made many foreign trips. He's seen as opening up, standing on the world stage, and very much reaching out to other countries, unlike as the U.S. President seems to be pulling away from the world stage in isolationism. So Narendra Modi is certainly seen here as really an example or symbolic of India's growing confidence and as a player of a very strong economy, and people are welcoming it.
And the way it changes the dynamics in the politics in West Asia, the fact that the Indian Prime Minister is making his first visit and not visiting Ramallah, is that something that is being noted? And what sort of interest or reaction is that evoking?
It absolutely has been noticed. Of course, it was pointed out that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has met Mahmoud Abbas in the past, but this visit is about Israel. It's not about the Israel-Palestinian relationship, and that represented a maturing relationship. It also showed a level of confidence in India, saying, I can be friends with Israel, I can be friends with Saudi Arabia, and it doesn't have to be an and or. It's not, you don't have to pick friends, but that shows a level of maturity, and that is what it's seen as certainly a level of confidence. It has absolutely been discussed. There has also been questions here whether his visit has stirred any animosity among Muslims within India, because Israel is often painted as this anti-Muslim state. However, seeing Israel more than just one shade just shows a level of depth and understanding and maturity about this relationship. That is what's being embraced, and that's what's being commented upon.
All right, Mandy Clark, thanks very much. Good to have you as always on this show.